Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the committee at any time. I now recognize myself for an opening statement. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the first hearing of the 117th Congress of the Environment Subcommittee. I want to recognize our ranking member, Ralph Northam, and our vice chair, Rashida Tlaib, and thank all of the members and witnesses for participating. This is a historic hearing. This is the first time that the United States Congress is examining an elimination of fossil fuel subsidies. These subsidies have been on our books for over 100 years. They have been giveaways to the fossil fuel industry embedded in our tax code. Now, in 2009, the United States committed with other G7 countries to eliminate these fossil fuel subsidies. We actually had self-review, peer review, where we submitted a report in 2016 acknowledging that these fossil fuel subsidies exist. So the argument that the fossil fuel subsidies don't exist is simply factually false. It's a lie, it's a misrepresentation. It's a contradiction of what our own United States government has represented to the world. We need to be very specific about what these fossil fuel subsidies are, and today's hearing will make it clear that many in the environmental movement and in Congress stand absolutely committed that these subsidies must be eliminated in the next infrastructure package. And there are 5 specific ones that we will detail that must be eliminated. And we want to hear from our experts about why that's the case and what else can be done. Now, let's just get some basic facts on the table. In 2020, the fossil fuel industry spent over $250 million in political contributions and federal lobbying. In return, the fossil fuel companies received over $30 billion in federal subsidies and direct pandemic relief in 2020. And guess what? They received this relief and they were still laying off workers. So the subsidies, the relief, are not going to actual fossil fuel workers. We stand with the workers. We stand with those who are job creators. What we don't want is people making $500,000, $600,000 to lobby. What we don't want is people making millions of dollars on taxpayer subsidies. And that's what is being eliminated. This is not going to hurt in any way the jobs. What it's going to do is stop having taxpayer subsidies go to pay lobbyists and rich executives. The industry, of course, opposed the Waxman-Markey climate bill. They have denied the simple fact that fossil fuels are the largest contributor to climate change. Despite the ad campaign, everyone knows that fossil fuels create greenhouse gas emissions, and these fossil fuel subsidies are outdated and need to go. Oil Change International found this expenditure costs $2.3 billion annually for just the tax deduction on intangible drilling costs. The tax deduction for the percentage depletion, which started in 1926, cost $1.3 billion annually. We need to make sure we start to eliminate these. We will hear testimony from Tara Houska and Jill Hunkler, both really inspirational people, about how fossil fuel production pollution has affected their communities. And that's the impact that it's having on real people. You know, Vice Chair Tlaib always makes it personal. I mean, this is actually leading to excessive pollution in communities, and they will testify about the impact it's having on them and their neighbors and their families. We will also hear testimony from Greta Thunberg, the world famous climate activist, about how ending fossil fuel subsidies are absolutely essential to the leadership in the world, that it matters that we have these fossil fuel subsidies eliminated in our infrastructure plan, not just for the United States, but Ms. Thunberg will tell us why it matters for the world. And we will hear testimony from Dr. Joe Aldy and Peter Erickson about fossil fuel subsidies not supporting energy independence or jobs, and other ways that actually can support energy independence and jobs. The largest subsidies that must be eliminated include deduction for intangible drilling costs, the percentage depletion, the MLPs, corporate tax exemption for fuel master limited partnerships, the last in, last out accounting, and the dual capacity taxpayer credit. These are the 5 things we insist must be ended in this infrastructure bill. And of course, I'm also proud to co-sponsor the End Polluter Welfare Act with Senator Sanders and Representative Omar. That's even more comprehensive about all the fossil fuel subsidies. We're focused on the top 5, but there are many more, and that's why I'm proud on that legislation, to be on that legislation. The bottom line, this hearing will expose what the fossil fuel subsidies are in our tax code, expose that they're out of date, make it clear that they must end, and make it clear that the environmental movement in the United States is absolutely committed to ending these in this infrastructure bill. With that, I want to now recognize our distinguished ranking member, Member Northam, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairman Rokon. It's Norman. I've been confused with Ralph Northam.
I apologize for that, sir.
That's fine. Chairman Rokon, I appreciate you having this meeting, this committee hearing, and I want to thank the witnesses for taking the time to appear before the subcommittee. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the amazing progress that the United States has made on climate change. We are leading the world in reducing emissions, having reduced more than the next 12 emissions reducing countries combined. Because these reductions have come via innovation and market forces, energy costs have decreased nationwide. While it really wasn't reported by the media, the Trump administration made substantial progress to protect the environment. Combined air pollution emissions fell more than 7%, while simultaneously growing the economy, particularly before the COVID-19 pandemic. My colleagues on the left have regrettably resorted to fear tactics to scare people into action regarding climate change. This is not healthy, nor is it productive. One survey of 30,000 people worldwide found that nearly all of the people surveyed believed climate change would make humanity extinct. Children have also been greatly impacted by the fear of climate change as well. The American Psychological Association stated that they were aware of reports that children are increasingly suffering from eco-anxiety. I hope eventually that our committee can move past doomsday scenarios and headlines and focus on the energy policy steps we should be taking and what their cost and impacts are. Rejoining the Paris Climate Accords is not one of these policies, folks. Not only does this agreement fail to hold countries like China, which uses over 50% of the coal, it does not hold them accountable for their emissions output. It only exacerbates a double standard despite our contribution to the global economy and to the nationwide GDP. Unless China stops its continuing growth of emissions, any actions we take would be offset several times over by China. This does not sound like a good deal for American workers or American energy independence and puts our country at a distinct disadvantage with our global competitors, nor has it seemed like there's any repercussions for them doing what they're doing to this nation as well as the world. This week, Democrats in Congress reintroduced the Green New Deal. It should actually be called the Radical New Doom because it is not really about climate change. Only 6% of it really goes toward any type of climate, 6 to 9%, any type of change in the climate. It's an effort by the far left to remake our economy and do away with affordable energy while destroying millions of jobs. Make no mistake, the Green New Deal is not an infrastructure plan. The Republican Study Committee has found that the Green New Deal could potentially result in a 286% increase in energy bills per household, and about 50% of the entire American economy would be under government control. As a former small business owner, those numbers are terrifying, they're staggering, and it goes against America's great tradition of a free market system. As Republicans, we will continue to support responsible policies that work to solve our problems by promoting innovation and investing in clean and clear energy infrastructure. However, I do fear that a premature move away from fossil fuels, particularly for poor areas, means that they will continue to have little access to the type of cheap, reliable energy that enables economic growth and allows for the provisions of clean water and sanitation, widespread vaccination, and preventative child health services. I look forward to hearing from the Republican witness today from the American Petroleum Institute about the impact on jobs in his industry if the Green New Deal were to become a reality. I also look forward to learning about the impact proposals by Democrats that will have on oil and gas industry if it is treated differently under the United States tax code. The United States is fortunate to have a copious clean energy natural resources. We must use those resources to advance American interests while continuing to lead the world in emission reductions. Not back policies that increase our dependence on foreign countries or are hostile to American interests. Inexpensive, accessible energy has led to technological, medical, and other advances that have driven the American economy and increased the U.S. life expectancy. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for your today's witnesses. I yield back.
Thank you, Ranking Member Norman, and appreciate your being a partner in areas where we can collaborate and appreciate your participation. I now want to introduce our witnesses. Our first witness today is Dr. Joseph Aldy, who is a professor of the practice of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. Next, we will hear from Peter Erickson, who is the Climate Policy Program Director for the Stockholm Environment Initiative. Then we will hear from Tara Houska. Tara is the founder of the Genu Collective. We will also hear from Jill Hunkler, who is a 7th-generation resident of the Ohio River Valley. And then we will hear from Greta Thunberg, who is a world-renowned climate activist. Finally, we will hear from Frank Macchiarola, who serves as a Senior Vice President of Policy, Economics, and Regulatory Affairs at the American Petroleum Institute. The witnesses will be unmuted so we can swear them in. Please raise your right hands. Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Yes.
Let the record show that the witnesses all answered in the affirmative. Thank you. Without objection, your written statements will be made part of our official record. With that, Dr. Aldy, you are now recognized for your testimony.
Good morning, Chairman Khanna, Ranking Member Norman, and members of the Subcommittee on Environment. My name is Joe Aldy, and I'm a professor of the practice of public policy at the Harvard Kennedy School. I've worked on the issue of fossil fuel subsidies and climate policy more generally as a former government official, in my research and in my teaching. I'm grateful for the opportunity to share my insights today, especially as we have new leadership in the White House and new voices in Congress prepared to combat the climate crisis with the urgency that this challenge demands. U.S. government continues to subsidize the production of oil, gas, and coal through tax policy and energy policy. To enable an evaluation of these subsidies, I presented in my written testimony 5 policy principles that can inform our understanding of what constitutes good and effective energy and climate policy and distinguish it from poor and ineffective policy. Let me briefly review these now. First, energy and climate policy should correct market failures. Well-functioning markets do not need government interventions, but markets that produce too much pollution, too little innovation, or too little competition merit policy intervention. Second, energy and climate policy should promote cost effectiveness. Cost-effective design ensures that the American taxpayer gets the biggest possible social return, such as improved public health from cleaner air and fewer threats from a changing climate for a given tax expenditure or policy cost. Third, energy and climate policy should contribute to fairness and justice. Fair policy should create a level playing field. A just policy should recognize the disproportionate historic burden of environmental pollution and infrastructure siting borne by low-income households and communities of color, and should it reduce such disparities. Fourth, energy and climate policy should enhance our international leadership. Over the past 4 years, the US government abdicated its leadership globally on many fronts, including on climate change. Actions the US government takes to combat climate change have the potential to amplify actions in other countries and thereby multiply the benefits of our own domestic policy. Finally, we should design an act, learn, act approach to energy and climate policy. We should design our policy to enable learning, to identify the priority risks to target, to assess what works and what does not, and to examine what experiences have important implications for broadening and deepening our climate change and energy policy program. We need to act quickly, but we also need to be smart about our actions. And integrating learning and flexibility in our policy increases the effectiveness of our response to climate change. In my written testimony, I show how fossil fuel subsidies fall short on each of these 5 principles. Fossil fuel subsidies represent a government failure. Let me repeat that. Fossil fuel subsidies represent a government failure. They are a form of spending paid for by the American taxpayer to businesses in an industry that has long been profitable with negligible impact on production or employment. To the extent US production subsidies increase hydrocarbon consumption, the adverse public health, climate change, and labor productivity losses from pollution resulting from fossil fuel combustion could exceed the market value of these fuels. These adverse public health and climate damages are disproportionately borne by low-income households and communities of color. I want to emphasize this. We aren't getting much of any increase in hydrocarbon production because of these subsidies. By one estimate, we may be spending billions of dollars of taxpayer monies per year to increase output by 26,000 barrels per day. If an oil company spent that much money for such a small amount of production, it would go out of business. And if we're not increasing output, we're not creating many jobs. The continuation of US fossil fuel production subsidies undermines our government's efforts to engage partners from across the world to combat climate change. The elimination of fossil fuel subsidies here and abroad is a key step in our response to the climate crisis. As President Biden hosts the Climate Leaders Summit, this is all the more important. We did energy policy a certain way in the 20th century. Some of these fossil fuel subsidies have been a part of the tax code for more than 100 years, but the times have changed. We are bearing the harms of a changing climate today. We have a rich array of fundamentally new energy technologies available to us today. We need a new energy policy for the 21st century that can combat the climate crisis and improve the well-being of people throughout our country and around the world. The first step towards a more effective modern energy policy should be to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies. Thank you, Chairman Connor.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. With that, if we could have Mr. Erickson, you're now recognized for your testimony.
Thank you, Chairman Khanna and Ranking Member Norman, for this opportunity to testify today. My name is Peter Erickson, and I am a senior scientist at the U.S. Center of the Stockholm Environment Institute, a research affiliate of Tufts University. Today, my testimony has 3 points. 1, fossil fuel subsidies are an inefficient means of supporting economic activity. 2, they undermine efforts to deal with climate change. And 3, they work against improvements in public health. On the first point, the US government has subsidized fossil fuel production for more than a century, including by forgiving or delaying tax payments that are otherwise required. The intangible drilling cost provision and the percentage depletion allowance are examples of this. The ostensible rationale for these subsidies has been to promote increased production and jobs. However, the vast majority of the value of subsidies goes to new oil and gas wells that are already expected to be profitable and would be developed anyway. For example, my research has found that over 96% of subsidy value flows directly to excess profits over and above the profits required to satisfy minimum investment hurdles. Most of the value of these subsidies is therefore not contributing to jobs on the ground. Second, fossil fuel subsidies undermine efforts to deal with climate change. Subsidies can, at times, make production of fossil fuels higher than it would otherwise be. This happens when oil and gas prices are very low and companies otherwise have little or no incentive to drill. These subsidy-driven increases in drilling, even though relatively small, still raise global greenhouse gas emissions, undercutting other hard-won gains on the climate crisis. Subsidies therefore work against the need to rapidly wind down emissions from burning oil, gas, and coal. Further, subsidies can have symbolic effects since their continued existence may be read by other nations as a sign that the US is not taking its commitments to subsidy reform or to climate action as seriously as it should be. In 2016, with other G7 governments gathered in Japan, the US committed to eliminate fossil fuel subsidies by 2025. By following through on this, the US would encourage other countries to do the same, multiplying the benefits. Third, fossil fuel subsidies work against needed improvements in public health. Subsidies to fossil fuels also contribute indirectly to air and water pollution, creating added community health concerns. For example, research has found that the cumulative health damages from the shale gas boom in Appalachia outweigh benefits from any new employment. Producing and burning fossil fuels creates air pollution that can lead to worsening asthma, adverse pregnancy and birth outcomes, and even premature death. Air pollution from oil and gas drilling can also exacerbate inequalities. In the Eagle Ford Basin in Texas, oil producers routinely burn off large quantities of natural gas that they consider to be waste, releasing toxic and carcinogenic compounds more often in Hispanic neighborhoods than in non-Hispanic ones. Opponents of fossil fuel subsidy reform have argued that special provisions in the tax code are not subsidies specifically because they have been there for so long. But that's wrong. Policies that provide financial benefits to companies at a cost to the public, whether provided through the tax code or otherwise, constitute just as much a subsidy as writing a check, if these financial benefits are not generally available to other industries. Not only do tax preferences meet that definition of subsidy, so do other policies that extend beyond the tax code. For example, governments often charge companies inadequate fees to cover the cost of retiring oil and gas wells. The result is a cleanup bill that now totals hundreds of billions of dollars and may well be paid by the public rather than the companies that created the pollution. In summary, subsidies to fossil fuel producers are an inefficient means of creating jobs. They hold back the low carbon energy transition, and they work against efforts to improve public health. Thank you to the committee for this important hearing.
Thank you, Mr. Erickson. Now we'll hear from Ms. Houska. You're now recognized for your testimony.
Bonjour and hello, Guinawa. My name is Tara Houska. I'm an attorney organizer from Couchiching First Nation and Anishinaabe on the border of Minnesota and Ontario. I'm the co-founder of Not Your Mascots and the founder of GNU Collective. I spent 6 months out on the front lines of fighting Dakota Access Pipeline, which is still operating illegally right now, today, at this moment. And I'm also engaged in the movement to defund fossil fuels and a multi-year struggle against Enbridge's Line 3 in my own territory. So a really common perception of Native people is that we're people of the past, that we're the static footnote in history. But we were here before the arrival of the United States. We were here before Canada, and we are still here today. There is this long dispossession of genocide and removal, and then there's like nothing after that. People seem to think that we didn't keep progressing after the 1800s. But the reality is that we're just 5% of the population globally, Indigenous people, and we hold 80% of its biodiversity. We're the last holders of the sacred places all over Mother Earth. Despite this, our voices are almost entirely absent from the table of solving climate crisis. But despite the reality of what's actually happening, our sovereignty is not absolute. It's often subject to the whims of judiciary or a confusing web of governmental authority influenced by special interests. Solution beyond teaching the basics of life, that we all need healthy air, water, soil to live, that we can't drink money, no matter how you try to spin it, is the imperative that we stand together centering justice, equity, and to reconnect to the living world by being in community with our mother. We know what a just transition should look like, and we have to find out what that looks like for everyone, because water shortages are already happening all over the world. We have to protect communities that are at risk, like my own. We are the people who are impacted first and worst by climate crisis, yet we are the people who often contribute the least to climate crisis. Native people have never lost our connection to the land and to the water. Many of us live in community with our mother as a practice, not in theory. I always ask people to find out where their water comes from, where their food comes from, and to internalize what that actually means. People buy things and don't have a second thought about the hands and places that their purchases came from. They turn the tap or buy a bottle of water and don't think about that journey from the earth to their lips. Everything comes from somewhere. Every bit of life comes from the earth, and everything is returned to the earth, including human beings. So in my own territory, Enbridge's Line 3 is one of the dirtiest fossil fuels pipelines. It would be one of the largest tar sands oil pipelines in the world, carrying up to 915,000 barrels a day of tar sands through our sacred wild rice beds, through our territory, to the shore of Lake Superior, through the Mississippi headwaters. It uses underhanded methods to achieve its project goals and plays loose and fast with safety and spill response plans. So First Nations, tribal communities, environmental groups, communities across the Great Lakes region have been fighting for over 7 years to stop this corridor and to stop Line 3. We're suing in the courts. Three different Ojibwe nations are suing. Minnesota's own Department of Commerce is suing for failure to justify the line via their oil forecast. And the people are fighting on the ground, literally chaining themselves to the machines. Over 250 people have been arrested at this point since December, arrested during the middle of a pandemic, climbing into pipelines, climbing into frozen tar sands lines, literally trying to fight for their lives, for their futures. It's mostly young people that are taking these actions. Line 3 is personal for me because it goes through my people's territory and endangers that what sits at the center of our migration story, which is wild rice. There are threats to the drinking water of millions. There's all these irrevocable harms of climate emissions and Line 3 being a 10% expansion of the tar sands. But when it comes to the wild rice, it's a threat to our cultural survival. We're talking about cultural genocide yet again in the history of this nation. Wild rice is at the center of our culture and our connection. It's the only place in the world that wild rice grows. Our traditional economies of harvesting somehow are expendable to the economy of extraction. We endured forced theft, removal, theft of lands, theft of culture, and now we endure the histories want to eradicate what we have left. So I recognize that my words might appear idealistic, that I do not understand the way of the world, that it cannot change so readily or so easily. I wonder though if this committee and we as people believe that we have truly conquered the earth, if we can actually live without water, if we are civilized when the cost is globalized destruction of our shared and only home. We are in rough shape as a species. I want to look upon the faces of my grandchildren and tell them I did everything I possibly could to give them a better world, that I didn't linger in words and incremental policy without substantive action as the world burns and the seas rise. I hope that you do too. And I pray that we move forward together. Very much.
Thank you, Ms. Houska. Now, Ms. Hunkler, you are recognized for your testimony.
Thank you. It's an honor to have this opportunity to share the truth about fossil fuel extraction in Appalachia. I respect the members of this committee and appreciate your courageous leadership in service of the people. My intention is to share this truth. Continuing to subsidize the fossil fuel industry will not only perpetuate the climate crisis, but the plastics pollution, environmental justice, and public health crises as well. I'm a fracking refugee. I was forced from my home at the headwaters of the historically pristine Captina Creek watershed in Belmont County, Ohio, after being surrounded by oil and gas infrastructure and its associated pollution, including a compressor station, 78 fracking wells, an interstate and gathering pipelines, all within a 5-mile radius of my home. I lived in the hollow below with Slope Creek running through my yard. Air pollution from these facilities emanate volatile organic compounds, some of which are known carcinogens. They're heavier than air and they hover in the hollows. I never imagined that my quiet country and healthy way of life would disappear. The negative health impacts we experienced were too much to bear. Belmont County is the most heavily fracked in the state with over 595 producing wells. Those of us living in these once peaceful hills are not only dealing with negative health impacts. We are also experiencing unsafe roadways due to industry traffic, air and noise pollution, public, spring, and well water contamination, pipeline explosions, and well pad fires, including one operated by a Norwegian oil company that contaminated a stream, resulting in the death of 70,000 fish. Our water supplies are being depleted by industry withdrawals from our reservoirs, ponds, and streams. In 2018, a fracking well blowout in Belmont County caused the largest methane leak in U.S. history, forcing residents to evacuate their homes for weeks. And in another horrifying incident, a brine truck accident contaminated Barnesville's reservoir with radioactive materials. At the time of the spill, the Ohio Environmental Protection Agency water test results showed a spike in radium, a naturally occurring radioactive element that is brought to the surface in the fracking process. I witnessed a former oil field operations manager react in shock and anger to an illustration showing the transmission of radioactivity to industry workers in a 2016 report of the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers. The industry continues to tout misinformation about America's clean energy future when in fact it produces toxic, radioactive waste, destroys massive amounts of precious water for its singular use, and makes the region poorer rather than richer in the long run. There are 240 Class II wastewater injection wells in Ohio. 1.5 billion gallons of wastewater have been produced here. Now fracking wastewater has been permitted to be transported via barging on the Ohio River, threatening the drinking water supplies of 5 million people. In the years since the fracking boom began, Belmont and other Eastern Ohio gas-producing counties haven't gained jobs. In fact, we have lost more than 6,500 jobs, according to the data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis and Bureau of Labor Statistics. And the region's population has declined by more than 13,000 people, according to research by the Ohio River Valley Institute, which has dispelled myths of lasting economic benefits and job creation in Appalachia, fracking counties, and corrected misconceptions that cutting subsidies for the fossil fuel industry is cutting jobs. I am living in a sacrifice zone due to the polluting and poorly regulated oil and gas industry, and now the petrochemical industry wants to invade and create even more toxic air pollution. The industry will require even more fracking in our region to provide feedstock to make plastics. The regulatory agencies are already failing to protect communities from air pollution from fracking, and now they have granted air permits to the PTT Global Chemical Ethane Cracker Plant. If constructed, the Thai-owned facility would spew hundreds of tons of hazardous contaminants into the air each year. The cracker plant would draw ethane supplies from the proposed Mountaineer natural gas storage facility, which would develop salt caverns to store up to 3.5 million barrels of explosive, highly flammable NGLs next to and potentially underneath the Ohio River. Companies are securing federal support for these petrochemical projects in the form of loan guarantees from the Department of Energy. This cannot be allowed to happen. We are asking the subcommittee and the Biden administration to halt the continued development of oil and gas and petrochemical industries. We must embrace a better vision for Appalachia, creating renewable energy economies and regenerative agricultural development. A global commitment must be made to restore peace and harmony with nature and one another. We shall remain persistent and resistant to all that threatens our children's future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Hunkler, for your testimony. Now I want to recognize Ms. Thunberg. You're now recognized for your testimony.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you for inviting me and for holding this hearing. I don't represent any financial or political interests. I'm not a lobbyist, so I can't negotiate, make deals, or compromise. I have nothing to offer you, nor am I a scientist. All I can do is to urge you to listen to and act on the science and to use your common sense. And I'm not even going to explain why we need to make real drastic changes and dramatically lower our emissions in line with the overall current best available science. It is the year 2021. The fact that we are still having this discussion, and even more that we are still subsidizing fossil fuels directly or indirectly using taxpayer money, is a disgrace. It is a clear proof that we have not understood the climate emergency at all. If you compare the current so-called climate policies to the overall current best available science, you clearly see that there's a huge gap. the gap between what we are doing and what actually needs to be done in order to stay below the 1.5 degrees Celsius target is widening by the second. And the simple fact, an uncomfortable fact, is that if we are to live up to our promises and commitments in the Paris Agreement, we have to end fossil fuel subsidies, stop new exploration and extraction, completely divest from fossil fuels, and keep the carbon in the ground. Now, especially the US, taking into account the fact that it is the biggest emitter in history. And just to be clear, that is not my opinion. It is what the science clearly shows. And yet, this is just the very minimum amount of effort that is needed to start the rapid sustainable transition. And it may seem like we are asking for a lot. And you will, of course, say that we are naive. And that's fine. But at least we are not so naive that we believe things will be solved through countries and companies making vague, distant, insufficient targets without any real pressure from the media and the general public. So either you do this, or you're going to have to start to explain to your children and the most affected people why you are surrendering on the 1.5 degree target. Given up without even trying. Well, what I'm here to say is that unlike you, my generation will not give up without a fight. And to be honest, I don't believe for a second that you will actually do this. The climate crisis doesn't exist in the public debate today. And since it doesn't really exist and the general level of awareness is so absurdly low, you will still get away with continuing to contribute to the destruction of present and future living conditions. And I know I'm not the one who's supposed to ask questions here, but there is something I really do wonder. How long do you honestly believe that people in power like you will get away with it? How long do you think you can continue to ignore the climate crisis, the global aspect of equity and historic emissions without being held accountable? You get away with it now, but sooner or later, people are going to realize what you have been doing all this time. That's inevitable. You still have time to do the right thing and to save your legacies. But that window of time is not going to last for long. What happens then? We, the young people, are the ones who are going to write about you in the history books. We are the ones who get to decide how you will be remembered. So my advice for you is to choose wisely. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Thunberg. And now we have our fifth witness, Mr. Macchiarola. Mr. Macchiarola, you are now recognized for your testimony.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairman Khanna, Ranking Member Norman, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I want to speak with you this morning about the dual challenge of providing affordable and reliable energy to meet growing demand while reducing emissions and addressing the risks of climate change. American oil and gas workers meet this challenge every single day. Our industry supports more than 10 million jobs and 7% of our nation's economy. The average annual salary of oil and natural gas workers is approximately $108,000, nearly double the private sector average. In 2019, in the districts represented on this subcommittee alone, our industry supported approximately 325,000 jobs, directly employing 75,000 people. These are the people helping to deliver affordable energy to our homes and businesses and energy security to our nation. Over the next 2 years, as countries around the world emerge from the pandemic, global GDP is projected to grow at its highest rate in nearly a half a century. As economies expand and the world's population grows, the global consumption of oil and natural gas will also continue to increase. even under IEA's Sustainable Development Scenario, which outlines a major transformation of global energy systems and is fully aligned with the Paris Agreement. Oil and natural gas are still projected to provide 46% of the world's energy in 2040. The critical question for Congress is whether more of this energy will come from right here at home or from overseas. The answer to this question has profound implications for our nation's future. We know why energy leadership for America is important to our economic strength and national security. But American energy leadership is also important to protecting the environment and addressing climate change. Our commitment to environmental protection is clear, as the United States is now the global leader in both energy production and CO2 emissions reductions. Over the past several years, the primary driver of emissions reductions has been the increased use of natural gas for power generation. With smart policies, we can build on this progress. Our industry is also working to reduce methane emissions from our operations. From 1990 to 2019, methane emissions from natural gas systems declined 16%, while production increased by 90%, effectively a 55% decline in the rate of emissions. To build on this progress, API recently released our Climate Action Framework, a series of public policies and industry initiatives that provide tangible solutions for policymakers, industry, and the public to help meet the challenge of climate change. As this committee examines tax and energy policy, I'd like to emphasize the importance of a federal tax policy that promotes investment in the United States and ensures America's leadership role in the global economic recovery. As it applies to oil and natural gas industry, provisions covering natural resources take into account the need to recover the costs associated with various investments to support reinvestment back into the business. This includes deductions for the recovery of payments for expenses like equipment, labor, and wages. These cost recovery mechanisms are not subsidies, but rather common tools that allow businesses to expand, invest, and create jobs. Furthermore, unlike tax credits that reduce a tax obligation outright, these measures do not affect how much our industry pays in taxes, but rather the timing of such payment. These investments made help businesses grow and ultimately provide significant revenues to the American taxpayer. Over the past decade, the U.S. Department of the Interior dispersed approximately $10 billion per year generated from energy production on federal lands and waters, $12 billion in 2019 alone. In addition, excise taxes placed on our products provide significant revenues for infrastructure projects. In 2019, federal fuel taxes generated $36 billion for highways and bridges that help keep our nation moving. It's essential we implement effective and achievable policies that allow us to continue to reduce emissions while supporting America's economy and energy security. The oil and natural gas industry stands ready to work with you to do just that. Thank you for the opportunity to testify, and I look forward to the committee questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Macchiarola, for your testimony. And now we are going to proceed to the questioning. Everyone on the committee who wishes to ask questions will have 5 minutes, and I will begin. The chair now recognizes himself for 5 minutes of questioning. Let me say I was moved, Ms. Thunberg, with your very eloquent statement about how we will be judged in history and how you plan to write it. Do you think that the Biden administration must make repealing these 5 fossil fuel subsidies the first and highest priority in the next infrastructure bill?
Yes, I mean, you don't need me saying that this is, of course, should be one of the top priorities. But if you do ask for my opinion, then yes, of course. Because if you look at the overall current best available science, that is clearly, it shows that is what is needed right now. So, yeah, definitely.
And could you speak a little bit, given your international perspective, about what message we would be sending in Congress if we passed an infrastructure bill and did not have the elimination of fossil fuel subsidies in there after we ran on that and after it's in the president's plan? And if, let's say, we did not have that, what message would that send to other countries?
I guess it would send the message that you're not really taking it serious, that you are talking very much, but not really taking action. I know that sounds very oversimplified, but that is what it all comes down to. We're all talking about these distant targets and we are gonna act and we have reduced our emissions and so on. But we can talk as much we want as long as we don't take real bold action right now, reducing the emissions at the source, then it doesn't really mean anything. At least that's what I, as a young person and from talking from an international perspective, that's the signal that you will be sending out.
Would it be fair to say it would be a gut punch to young people and the environmental movement around the world if these fossil fuel subsidies aren't eliminated in this infrastructure bill?
Yeah, pretty much. That's a good description.
Mr. Macchiarola, I listened very carefully to your statement because I was perplexed when you said that there was no special fossil fuel subsidy, as you've said in a number of your public statements. And I was trying to understand how you're under oath, how are you possibly saying that? And it seems to me I understand the loophole now that you're trying to invoke. You say they pay the taxes, but this is just a matter of time. Can you explain to us what the standard tax accounting practices mean for depreciation if there was not the intangible drilling deduction? How many years does standard tax accounting allow for?
Sure. Chairman, I think in reference to the IDC specifically, I think the way to think about this is in terms of the similar treatment that research and development gets in the tax code. What we're trying to do is incentivize reinvestment back into projects to be able to.
I don't want to interrupt. What would the standard, just so we're on the same page, what would the standard tax accounting be? The standard tax accounting depreciation?
The current tax accounting of appreciation is over a longer period of time.
Do you know what the standard tax accounting depreciation would be?
But
over how many years? I mean, it's a simple question. I mean, I assume you know the basics.
Congressman, Mr. Chairman, I think
the answer is it's over 7 years. And what the intangible drilling deduction does, and you may want to have people brief you next time before you come to Congress. It's a 7-year standard deduction. And what the intangible drilling does is for oil companies, they get to deduct expenses on the first year for 7 years. Do you understand the concept of the present value of money?
I certainly do understand that.
And just to be clear, the research and development tax credit and other tax credits can't be taken all at once. Every other industry has standard tax accounting at 7 years. You say you're not for any special exemption. Would you be fine using standard accounting practices for every other industry for the oil and gas industry? Can you commit to that today?
I think the importance of this provision is to be able to reinvest into the next project.
But every other industry reinvests and they have 7 years.
It is similar treatment in the tax code.
It's not similar. Can you just answer this last question and then I'll give you the last word. Why is it that your industry doesn't get the standard 7 years that every other industry, including the tech companies in my district? I'm very familiar with research and development tax credit. I'm all for it. Can you commit today that your industry should get the same provision as every other industry? Why is it that the oil industry should only get 1 year to take all the depreciation in defiance of standard accounting principles?
First off, it's important to note where that savings goes. 80% of the savings that you're talking about goes back into pay wages to be able to move on to the next project, to be able to reinvest
for standard tax accounting
and grow business.
Are you fine to be subject to the same thing that the tech companies in my district or Wall Street is? Can you just say you're fine with standard tax accounting principles?
I think to take, Mr. Chairman, to take one provision of the tax code and say it should be applied in the same form and fashion to every business without
what you're
looking at,
saying. You're saying that it's the same to
without
you.
looking at the entire tax code. The purpose of the tax code is to provide revenues to meet government expenditures.
You said you were saying, you
to-
said
to
you
be
were
able to
saying.
provide, to be able to provide.
Last
service-
question, sir. You said that you're being treated the exact same as every other industry. That's what you said under oath. That's what you said to the press. And I'm saying right now, there's one provision of the code. We can discuss the others where you're not, where every other person gets 7 years. You didn't know the 7 years. That's standard accounting 101. Trust me, that's true. Now, you could deny the net present value of money. That would be like denying that the earth is round. Obviously, there's a benefit if you get to depreciate it all at once. Can you just, on a consensus, say you commit to what you said? You're fine being treated like every other industry with a 7-year deduction.
We are certainly fine being treated like every other industry.
Okay.
There's no question about that. If you want to take the entire tax code and treat the oil and gas industry the same as every other industry, we're happy to do that.
Ranking Member Norman, my time has elapsed, so I recognize you for your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Thunberg, thank you for your involvement here today. I commend you for your willingness to testify and get involved with public policy. In the past, when you're talking about climate change, you have said, quote, "I want you to panic. I want you to feel the fear I feel every day." Is there what particular study or scientific report did you read that made you come to this conclusion?
Thank you for your question. First of all, let me just clear that those are metaphors. In speeches, you often use metaphors. Of course, I don't mean literally that I want people to panic. So there was no scientific study that made me come to that conclusion.
Oh, okay, so you didn't say that.
I did, but it's a metaphor that you often use in speeches.
Metaphor for what? I mean, how do you, what I'm asking on panic, I want you to panic. What does that tell me what you meant by that?
By that, I mean that I want people to step out of their comfort zones. And to not just see the climate crisis as a far distant threat, but rather as something that is impacting people already today. And people to step out of their comfort zones to start taking real action. Okay.
What in your opinion is on the ppm parts per million, what is acceptable, permissible on CO2 emissions in your opinion? What actual amount do you think is permissible?
Well, I mean, of course, there is no magic amount that says that this is an okay amount. The science doesn't really work that way, but of course we can say that it is the higher the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere is, the bigger the risks are going to be. So, I mean, you can't say that there's one amount that is acceptable and not. Of course, there's not one magic tipping point where everything is beyond saving and so on, but rather we should try to keep it as low as possible.
Okay, so you wouldn't name a particular number. What about China, India, the other countries where there's if this bill passes, there's no retribution against these countries that's going to offset anything we do here in America? What is your take on that?
Well, if we just thought like that, it would be very convenient, wouldn't it? But rather we need to see the holistic perspective. How can we, if we take, for example, India as an example, how can we expect India to take action when the developed countries who have actually promised to lead the way won't do that? If we take into account the global aspect of equity, I mean, there are many people around the world who need to be able to raise their standard of living. And if we who live in high income countries aren't able to take a few steps back in order to let other people raise their living standard, then, I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. And of course, those countries definitely need to take their responsibility as well. And that's why we need global cooperation. And if countries won't take action, then there's no global cooperation. If the US, for example, which is the biggest emitter in history, won't take action, then how can we expect other countries to do that? So taking action ourselves is also a guarantee that other countries, I mean, it will be a snowball effect, most likely. If one country does something, then other countries will follow. If no country does something, then no one will follow.
Okay, so China is an example, which is a communist. They practice genocide on their people. They will watch America and then will just voluntarily reduce their emissions. Is that your thoughts?
No, I mean, we should do, of course, everything we can to make sure that China takes the responsibility. But I mean, there is not really much. I mean, all I can do is to try to advocate for global change. All you can do is to take action and try to create a global pressure on China so that they will have to take action. As you say,
Okay.
we can't just go there and ask them to do it. That would be very nice, but yeah, we need to think realistically as well.
Yeah, there's nothing in the bill that puts any type pressure other than, I guess, showing the example. Thank you for your testimony. Mr. Macchiarola, can you address the direct employment in the United States that the Green New Deal would affect? We're all seeing the gas prices jump 70 cents or more. We're now dependent on foreign countries that particularly don't have our best interests. Can you discuss how this Green New Deal would affect energy costs, gas costs, and the many other minerals that they are prohibiting to be mined in other states?
Sure. Thank you for your question, Congressman Norman. I think it's first important to look at the job creation within the oil and gas industry. We support 10 million jobs in the U.S. economy, nearly 7% of the U.S. economy. On this committee alone, 325,000 jobs supported by the industry, 75,000 directly. And let's talk about what the tax increases that are being proposed would do. In 2017, as a result of reducing the corporate tax rate, we created over a period of 19 straight reports, the lowest poverty rate in 60 years since the government kept that statistic. We created jobs for 19 straight months with wage growth over that period of time prior to the pandemic. The reason we did that was 70% of the savings from the tax cuts went directly to wages. That's right into the American people's pockets. On energy, what has the result been on energy of the American energy revolution? Over the past decade, as increases in costs have gone up by double digits in healthcare, education, and food costs, energy costs have gone down by 15%. The tax proposals considered here would drive those costs up. That would mean real costs for consumers. That would mean jobs. It's essential that we not go in that direction. Thank you for your question, Congressman.
Okay, you would agree corporations don't pay taxes, people pay taxes, don't they?
People do pay taxes.
And the fact that the depreciation schedules differ from industry to industry, the oil and gas industry is not like my industry, the real estate business. It's a different type of business. One size doesn't fit all. Would you agree?
One size does not fit all for all industries. That's right, Congressman.
Member Norman, I want to give you some more time. Your time has been expired, but I want to be polite. So maybe just one or two more.
Well, that's fine, Chairman. I didn't. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
can answer the question, the witness.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for the question, Ranking Member. I think what you try to do in a tax code is to provide revenues to meet government services, but you need to ensure a fair return for the taxpayer, but also U.S. competitiveness. We are in an increasingly globally interconnected world where competitiveness is essential. Some of the provisions that the chairman discussed would directly impact that competitiveness, particularly the double taxation on income earned or on taxes paid overseas. So it's absolutely essential that you look through the lens of U.S. competitiveness as you establish provisions within the tax code. Thank you for the question.
Thank you, Ranking Member. I now want to recognize our distinguished Chair, Carolyn Maloney, who really has prioritized climate change and the environment as a focus of the larger committee. And she's so committed to this issue that she's been joining us for part of this hearing. So Chairwoman Maloney.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me. We're on the floor voting now, and I have to be managing a bill, but I wanted to be here for your first subcommittee hearing and to congratulate you on being a chairman and also on focusing your first committee hearing on such an important topic. So, Mr. Chairman, one of the most painful realities of the climate crisis is that the path forward is paved with common sense, yet we seem incapable of finding our footing. As a nation, all we need to do is follow the science and fairly weigh the costs and benefits to see that the only viable path forward is one that revolutionizes our energy policy, builds a sustainable economy, and creates millions of clean energy jobs. If we fail, the consequences will be catastrophic, but if we are successful, the benefits will be tremendous. It's that simple. Just in my home state of New York, there are hundreds of thousands of hospitalizations, emergency room visits, and premature deaths that could be avoided. And the economic value of these health benefits could exceed $3.5 trillion. The US could take action today. Congress and the administration have a duty to lead and a responsibility to act without delay. Ms. Thunberg, you often identify the fact that global leaders fail to act rationally when it comes to the climate crisis. We have the science and the data. We see the climate changing before our eyes. We hear what will happen to us and to our children if we fail to act, and yet we still don't act. Why do you think that is? Ms. Thunberg.
Ms. Thunberg, are you still with us? I think we've had some technical difficulty. Let me just make sure. Ms. Thunberg, I think you're muted. Did you hear the chairwoman's question? Can we check? I don't think she's hearing it, the audio. Ms. Thunberg, can you hear us?
Is the problem on our side or on her side?
I think it's on her side. Ms. Thunberg, if you could raise your hand if you can hear us. No, I don't think she's hearing the feed. Ms. Chairwoman, apologies. While we get the technical issue fixed, I don't know if you had questions for any of the other witnesses.
My questions were for this extraordinary young woman. So I'll just wait.
She's right there, and so let's just work with the staff is working to try to fix the link as we speak.
Oh, why don't you go back to another Republican, and if we can get a hearing to her, then we'll continue.
Okay,
unfortunately, these technicalities sometimes take a long time. So maybe we should go.
I appreciate that. And so let us go on the Republican side. Let me just see who is our. Okay, so it will be to the Democratic side next again, because there's no Republican right now here. Do we want to have is Representative Omar here yet? Okay, do we want to have Representative Tlaib, our vice chair? Why don't we do this? Why don't we take a 5-minute recess to give everyone the chance to have the tech working because it seems like some of the members haven't worked. Chairwoman Maloney, would you be able to join us in 5 minutes if we can get this?
Well, we are on the floor voting on DC statehood, and I may not be able to come back, but if I can, I will. I want to hear the comments and testimony and answers to the questions on this important hearing. And
Okay,
again,
well, we appreciate your joining us. Sorry about the technical difficulty. I'm sure Ms. Thunberg will love to ask your question. If you can join us, that's great. If not, I'll give her the opportunity to respond to what you asked because it was a very important question.
thank you so much.
Thank you. All right, with that, let's take a 5-minute recess.